Okay, welcome back to the general session. It's with great pleasure that I introduce the FDIC Chairman Jelena McWilliams. Chairman McWilliams was sworn in as Chairman of the FDIC on June 5th, 2018. She serves a 6-year term on the FDIC Board of Directors and is designated as Chairman for a term of 5 years. In a recent article in the ABA Banking Journal, it stated, when Jelena Obrenic landed in Stockton, California in July of 1991, her world was turning upside down. A month before, Slovenia and Croatia had declared independence from her home country. Was that Yugoslavia, triggering several violent years of civil wars, ethnic conflict, and the final collapse of Balkan communism. It was her 18th birthday. She was alone in a new country as an exchange student with $500 to her name. The next day, she did something that would shape the future path of her life more than she knew. She opened a checking account. Nearly 28 years later, and now known as Jelena McWilliams, she has a very different vantage point on U.S. banking, namely the view of the Washington Monument from the corner office at the FDIC. The young Serbian woman who arrived in America as an exchange student with $500 to her name is now the chairman of the agency that ensures the safety and soundness of America's $13.4 trillion in deposits. What Chairman McWilliams brings to the FDIC is compassionate leadership that is capable of motivating people to think outside the box. During the LBA fly-in to Washington, D.C. last year, the LBA bankers met with Chairman McWilliams. Picture this. The bankers were sitting in the room not knowing what to expect when Chairman McWilliams entered the room, sat down, and proceeded to say, what do y'all want to talk about? Or what do you want to talk about? My wife gets on to me and say, y'all. It might have been y'all. What do you want to talk about? Talk about a breath of fresh air. The bankers in the room proceeded to express their concern about compliance issues and the examination processes. She opened up to us, and you could truly feel her compassion towards us and her concern for overregulation. The bankers were so impressed she received several ovations. I've been attending the LBA Washington trip for many years, and I can say that this meeting was by far the best we've ever had with the FDIC. I give you Jelena McWilliams.
So a couple of things I have to note. I can joke that I had a speech prepared. I didn't, but then I shoved it because he said, you know, you always ask what the bankers want to talk about. I actually don't have a speech. I'm going to speak for about 10 minutes, and then I'm going to ask you again, what do you want to talk about? But I laugh at all y'all and y'all, because actually on my honeymoon, I came to New Orleans, and we drove from California. And just did kind of the Grand Canyon and all of that stuff. And I think it was someplace in Texas, people started saying y'all. And then by the time it came to Louisiana, they were like, all y'all. And as now at that point in time, I spent about 5 years in the United States. And I was like, I got the all, y'all. Okay, I got that, you and all. But what's all y'all? And so I had to ask a Louisiana native, I'm sorry, can I just ask you, we have a friend here in New Orleans, and I said, okay, what is this all y'all? And he says, you too. I was like, got it, I'm good. All right, so good morning, all y'all. It's a pleasure to be here today, and thank you for having me. I truly don't have a speech prepared because I'll tell you a little bit about my approach to supervision. When I met you last year, I was on my job for I think a month or so, and I have a little bit of a deeper perspective now that it's been almost a year. So I want to talk to you about that and what I'm trying to accomplish at the FDIC, and then truly I just want to open it up for questions. And I don't understand why is the room so full in the back and not in the front. But we'll just leave it. This feels like a classroom where nobody wants to sit in the first 2 rows. So I may have to do a Socratic method and call the people in the back. So if I say you with a bow tie, you better get up. All right, so I started at the FDIC after having spent some time on the Senate, at the Federal Reserve during the financial crisis, and on the Senate Banking Committee immediately thereafter, and then having gone to work as a general counsel at a large regional bank, a job that frankly I was curious about, not because of the prestige or money or any of that stuff, but because I said to myself, you've been working on the bank regulatory side and the bank legislative side. So you've drafted legislation, you've drafted regulation, you've analyzed comment letters, you've been an outside counsel working at a law firm, but you've never actually been inside of a bank. And I thought it would be good for me at that point in my career to learn how does a bank react to regulations, compliance systems, et cetera, and just to learn exactly how do bank directors and bank managements think, and to do my job as a general counsel. And it was an eye-opening experience in a lot of regards. And one of the things that probably shocked me the most was how difficult the relationship between the regulated and the regulator can be. And I'll give you an example. It was Thursday of one week, and I was a general counsel, and all of the regulatory interactions went to my office. And there was a call that came through one of my employees, and it was a call from the Federal Reserve, who was our regulator, and the caller said, the senior management here would like to schedule a call with the executive team on Monday at 4. And didn't say what they're going to talk about. So in the next 2 hours, my office was like a train station. Everybody with a name, with a title that starts with a C, so Chief Executive Officer, Chief Risk Officer, Chief Compliance Officer, Chief everything, came through my office in the next 2 hours saying, the Fed wants to talk to us on Monday at 4. Do you know what it's about? Did you hear that the Fed wants to talk to us? So after about a sixth person walked in, I said, why don't we just call the Fed back and ask them what they want to talk to us? Oh, no, we don't call the Fed. So the next day, Friday, I had somebody from the Chief Compliance Officer shop come over and basically present a PowerPoint presentation. And I said, and what is this? And they said, well, the CRO wants you to review this. And I'm like, what am I reviewing? You're reviewing our presentation to the Fed. And I'm like, a presentation on what? On anything the Fed may ask. I was like, well, God bless you for being able to get all of that on 22 pages. You know what the call on Monday was about? It was about changing the central point of contact, which is examiner in charge, at the end of the five-year rotation. And I looked at my CEO and I was just like, we could have just called the Fed and asked them, instead of panicking over the weekend thinking this was kind of the unusual call. So it was that perspective that I had when I got a call whether or not I want to be considered for the FDIC chairman. And I said yes right away. And I spent about 18 months at the bank, and at that point in time, I thought I had I knew the tip of banking, the iceberg tip of banking, but I knew enough to understand that we actually need to change the culture in Washington, at least a little bit. So my tenure at the FDIC is about both changing the culture and the approach to our regulatory framework at the FDIC. And here's the bottom line. As I go to talk to different bankers, I committed to a nationwide listening tour going to every state in the nation. I guess I didn't realize how far some of these places are. It took me 24 hours to fly back from Austin last week with all of the flight cancellations. When I committed to that, I was thinking that it's important for us in Washington to actually hear from you rather than talk at you. So I refuse to have written speeches unless I'm giving a policy speech, and I refuse to have PowerPoint presentations when I come to talk to people, because it's supposed to be a dialogue and not a monologue, and I'm not supposed to be talking at you. So I'll give you quickly like my 3 or 4 priority points and then open it up for questions, Socratic method or otherwise. So one of my top priorities is changing the way we look at supervision. And I use an analogy that I clean my own house. I've never had a cleaning service. I have 2 dogs, elderly parents. I'm a single mother. I have a teenage daughter who's too busy to clean her room. And somehow I clean all of this. And no matter how much I clean, and I'm pretty good at cleaning at this point, so I can have a second career if this one fails. I go back up the stairs and I just clean the stairs and there's white dog hair on the stairs, and I go back cleaning the white dog hair, and then I remind myself, relax. The house is otherwise clean. You've just cleaned it. Don't go looking for dirt. So I tell my examiners, if you know that the house is otherwise clean, as you examine these banks, don't go looking for dirt. And if you find dirt, deal with it appropriately in the context of a clean house. And that's something that, frankly, is a little bit new, I think, at some of these regulatory agencies. And here's the bottom line. I tell people all the time, bankers, I'm not your friend, but I'm not your enemy either. I'm supposed to give you fair treatment and regulate you in a way where you feel that you can be heard and where your input is taken into consideration at the regulatory agency. So I have instructed staff at the FDIC to take a look at how we can both modernize our supervisory approach, where we put less burden on you, and then also kind of a culturally shift our approach at the FDIC, where we're not necessarily, on if I say this, it'll be tweeted, so don't tweet. I know it will be now, especially. We're not on a warpath looking for stuff. And that's not how a regulatory agency should function. And I'll give you an example. So, I came to the FDIC and I was like that perpetual child asking why? Not because I don't know, but because it's not clear to me why we have been doing stuff in a certain way for years. And so I basically said, one of the things I ask is in how many ways do we communicate with regulated entities? Because I'm thinking of a small bank, say 500 million or even smaller, that has 9, 10, 12 people working at the bank. And in my meetings, I will ask how many of your people are consumer facing versus how many are administrative versus how many are dealing with regulatory burdens and security and IT. And inevitably, they will tell me that about 60% of their personnel is dealing with admin and regulatory matters, and that 40% at best is consumer facing. So we have kind of flipped the community banking model where you actually have more people dealing with reg burden and compliance and IT, and fewer people actually facing consumers, which is probably not good for your businesses. And so I asked my staff at the FDIC, do we ever archive regulations and guidances? And no, we don't. And I said, why not? We haven't done it before. So I said, all right, how many financial institution letters do we have outstanding? And I think we had about 660 something or 670 of them on the prudential side and about 170 on the consumer side. So altogether, close to 900 or around 900. And just by me asking, can you please go and archive rules or fills that have been put in place, that have been superseded by different fills that address the same thing, we were able to archive over 60%. So we automatically took out 400-something fills just by asking, can we archive what's no longer active or shouldn't be active? And so we're looking through those efforts at the FDIC to see if there is a way for us to remove some of the regulatory burden without undermining safety and soundness on consumer protection, and I believe we can. And quite often I feel like I bought a house years ago in California, and it had all wallpaper on the house, and I went to remove the wallpaper, and it turns out there were like 3 other layers of wallpaper. And when I came to the lemongrass from the 1970s or 60s paper, I was like, well, these people really, they had like 4 layers of wallpaper on the same wall. And I feel sometimes our regulations are like that. We just keep on wallpapering over the prior ones without removing and kind of trying to refresh the wall and take a look at the wall. Maybe the wall is fine. And so that's what we're doing at the FDIC. Our examiners spend a lot of time inside of your banks. On average, our prudential risk management examiners, they spend about 89, 90 days on the road and at banks. And our consumer examiners spend about 66. And it's a lot. The burden is twofold on you and on us. On us because 4 to 5 years out of commissioning an examiner, and the commissioning process takes 4 years, we lose about 50% of them. And it costs us about $400,000 to train an examiner and commission them. It's more expensive than any college in the United States. And so when we lose them 4 to 5 years later, I always say this: if we lose them to you and they go to regulated entities, and we have our former examiners who are now your chief compliance officers, or your chief risk officers, or your chief lending officers, I'm okay with that. It's not optimal because we lost somebody, we spent a lot of money training, and we need to replenish, but at least they are where we want them to be, which is at regulated entities, so they can help you comply and know how the FDIC is thinking. But we need to do something about easing their burden in terms of travel and time spent away from home, as well as the number of days they spend inside of your institutions. So we're trying to move more stuff. We have a project right now, it's called Project 5, where we're testing a more off-site exam documentation review versus on-site. And we're looking to reduce the number of days that our examiners spend inside of your banks. We're also trying to be more transparent. And I came to the FDIC, and I have to tell you, it's a large agency and it has a lot of very dedicated staff. And in all honesty, I have not met a single person who said that they don't want to do the best job they can. Everybody's trying to do the best job they can, and they take their jobs very seriously. There was a book that was published, I think, in 1989 or 1990 that compared OTS, OCC, FRB, and FDIC. And on page 89 of this book, I have it on my desk, an OCC examiner is quoted by saying, each of our agencies has a mission, but the FDIC people, they're crazy about their mission. He said, I actually think there's a little statute statue in the hallway of the building, and that says Deposit Insurance Fund on it, and they all bow to it before they walk into every day for work. So people are very, very dedicated to this mission of protecting the Deposit Insurance Fund, ensuring safety and soundness and consumer protection and financial stability. So I generally, the workforce is very open to being better, but we're very kind of a set in our ways. It's an agency that was created, 86 years ago, and our frankly regulatory approach is still based on the last century and not the current century in terms of how we're looking at banks. So we're looking to modernize our approach. We have created a supervision modernization subcommittee at our community banking committee. We have also shifted and shuffled our membership on the community bank advisory committee, where I came to the FDIC and realized that our community bank advisory committee, or CBAC, is heavily represented by Northeast banks. And I said, I just spent 18 months in Ohio, and I've driven too many times up and down 70 and 71 and 270, and I can tell you there are areas in the United States that absolutely do not get enough attention here in Washington, but that need to get more attention. So we have reformatted how our CBAC is functioning. We have allowed the memberships that were expiring to go, and then I said, where's my Tornado Alley people? Okay, I just need the middle of the country represented. So we have reformatted everything. So now we have 3 people from each of our 6 regional offices. So there's more geographic diversity, and we have more rural representation on the committee as well. And it's a different perspective we're getting once you open it up to more than just Northeastern and 3 or 4 Western banks. You get a little bit more of a sense how different parts of the country are doing and what we need to do. On the Supervision Modernization Subcommittee of the CBAC, it's a mouthful, we're looking at how we can utilize technology. And we're also in the process of creating the Office of Innovation at the FDIC that has an inward goal and an outward goal. The inward goal is how can we use technology to improve our supervision process and do more stuff offsite while not sacrificing the quality of our exams. And the outward perspective is how can we allow you to innovate? And frankly, I think most of the banks in this room are small banks. And simply the economies of scale are not allowing you to compete effectively with large banks. And you're competing with non-banks, you're competing with credit unions, you're competing with larger banks, and then you're competing among yourselves. And it's just a lot of competition for a small bank. And on the regulatory side, we try to scale down our regulatory requirements for small banks, and we have different thresholds and cutoffs at 10 billion, 5 billion, 3 billion, 1 billion, 500 million. Just trying to adjust our regulatory frameworks to those thresholds, recognizing the thresholds are imperfect, but they are a tool that we use. And I have to tell you, I sometimes ponder how do very small banks below 500 million even stay in existence. Because the cost you have to spend on IT alone, not to mention cybersecurity, AML, BSA, is tremendous. So we need to figure out a way on the regulatory side, how can we create even more of a tool for the very small banks to perhaps share resources among them to move forward with some of the greatest regulatory burdens we have imposed. A part of that was that we got together with FinCEN and FRB, OCC, FDIC, FinCEN, and I think NCUA was as well at that meeting. We agreed to issue a joint statement on sharing of resources for the purposes of BSA AML compliance. And I have asked our staff, is there a way for us to do this as well on the third-party vendor due diligence, third-party risk management, and the IT examination side as well? Can we allow you, as you look at your IT resources, to team together and share the resources as much as you can? So you should be seeing something coming out of us in the next, let's just say soon. Government soon can mean a year. So those are some of the top initiatives I'm trying to do at the FDIC. I told my staff everything should be on the table, not because I have a political agenda, I don't, but because some of our regulations have not been revisited since 1990s. I looked at the 75 basis point national rate cap, and I said, why 75 basis point, and when was it last updated? And apparently it's been set at 75 basis points in 1998, and nobody has had a political will or whatever else, or thought it needed to be revised since then. we are far away from 1998 and the way banking was done in 1998, and you could attract deposits. And we need to adjust to the digital framework that a lot of banks are now going to, that the consumers expect and their customers expect. So we just need to update our regulations. And I told people, if we are right, we'll publish stuff for comment, and if things are still working the way they were intended and they're still good, we'll go on as with business as usual. But if we hear from the public that we could be doing something better, that there are ways to improve stuff, we should be improving stuff. So frankly, we need to adjust, and we need to be open to criticism and feedback. And so you'll see a lot of rulemakings and guidance is being published for comment from the FDIC. I joke that my staff has not slept since June 4th of last year. But seriously, I have asked them, put everything on the table and ask public to comment. And if the public says everything is fine and things are functioning well, we'll leave it as is. If they give us feedback that we need to incorporate and modernize these rules, we will. So those are some of the thoughts I have at the FDIC and the kind of initiatives I have. I have a lot of kind of little initiatives under those big picture initiatives, but I think you get a sense of what I'm trying to do at the FDIC. I'll tell you what I told the staff at the FDIC. I am going to be a one-term chairman. Unless we have a financial crisis and I need to stay there for the stability of the country, because I do think that these agencies benefit from fresh blood and new look at how things are done. I think it's way too easy in Washington to get lulled into getting it, done the same way you did it 10 years ago. Just don't rock the boat. And I'm hoping that, I can make the FDIC an agency that has effectively stepped into the next century of regulation and has adjusted its regulatory approach to the world as we know it now, and that the next chairman will build upon that and do even more and bring a better perspective than mine. With that, I would like to open it up for questions. Y'all, all y'all.
Thank you so much for coming, and thank you for listening to the bankers. As I reflect back on the history of FDIC, for most of the years of the FDIC, compliance reported to safety and soundness. And as I consider the changes since those were separated and made co-equal, it's actually the worst of all worlds. We treat the customer worse, and it's more expensive. And I'd suggest as you go around the country, just talk to bankers about going back to that model of compliance working for safety and soundness.
So the question is, it's more so a suggestion. Over the years, the FDIC has gone back and forth on having the compliance, consumer compliance, joint with risk management, prudential examination, and separated and together. And right now, as you know, it's and you know what I'm puzzled about. I have to tell you, it's together. It's separated. I'm even when I came to the FDIC and they kept on talking about compliance. To me, all of this is compliance. That's consumer compliance. And why don't you even call it consumer compliance? Is beyond me. So I think we're going to at least rename it to what it is, consumer compliance, because as a former general counsel, to me, all of this is compliance. We have looked at different models, and without mincing words too much, we're in a state of affairs where consumer protection has become a political issue, for better or for worse. Not to say that we cannot do equally good or better or whatever level of consumer protection if it's joint versus separate. But I have inherited the agency that looks like it does. I did bring a deputy for consumer and innovation, somebody that I worked with, my former boss from the Fed, who spent 22 years at the Fed drafting regulations, worked for 18 months at the CFPB. I hired him at the bank as my deputy general counsel for consumer issues. His name is Leonard Chanin. Some of you know him, but I thought he would give me a really good perspective on having worked at the Fed, having worked at the CFPB, having worked at the bank, having worked at a law firm, advising banks. Just a good perspective on how are we doing consumer stuff. And so he's my advisor on consumer issues for exactly that reason. I don't know what's the best approach. I inherited the approach that we have. I would like to know a little bit more about our consumer compliance work. And for those of you who were in Washington, D.C. last summer, again, I won't mince words. I was not pleased with the feedback I have received from you on consumer compliance exams, and I have immediately dispatched the head of our consumer supervision to Louisiana to come and talk to you and see how we can fix things. And I'm hoping that some progress has been made. I understand Mark is coming back this year again in June, and I would like to send Leonard as well, because the meeting with you was eye-opening, and I owe you both an apology if that's how the FDIC has been conducting these exams. And if we have rogue examiners, we need to take care of that. We need to create a culture of, again, openness and fairness and a dialogue. And if we're failing to do that, then we have a lot of work to do. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, bow tie in the back. Well, then you should not have worn a bow tie and sat in the back. No, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Here.
Just how independent is the FDIC from political pressure? Like, is it possible for the president to call you and say, I want y'all to start, focusing on this area or another area? What kind of comes to mind, and I don't even know if it's true, but I read had heard during the Obama administration that the FDIC had put pressure on certain banks that were doing business with the firearms industry to deny those folks banking services. And, that sounds like, if it's true, it sounds like kind of a political whim at work. Could you comment on that?
No, I can't. No, I'm kidding. I can and I should. And I think especially in Louisiana, it's important because I know you have a senator who's very focused on this issue as well, speaking of political sides of this. The president could pick up the phone and call. I mean, it's in his right to call the agency heads that he appointed. Nonetheless, we are an independent agency. And I tell the staff at the FDIC all the time, don't ever start a sentence with I feel. How you feel about something has nothing to do with how we regulate banks. Congress gave us a statute. Within those statutory requirements, we have some regulatory discretion, and it is our job to exercise that discretion very judiciously and very carefully. So I personally will not bow to political pressures, and I personally will not, I would rather step down than do something that I think is not within the mandate, and that mandate needs to be interpreted narrow. For safety and soundness, financial stability, consumer protection, et cetera, which is the specific description of what we do at the FDIC. I also know that what you're talking about is what has been essentially named Operation Choke Point, which was a DOJ terminology for it. I have taken a very strong stand against that. I have instituted a training program for our examiners. And if they don't do well enough on the training, they have to do training until they do well. And the training basically goes through real life scenarios. If this happens, how do you do? And so I have sent a global letter to all of my employees. It's global, even though we only function in the United States. We like to think of ourselves as being much bigger. I sent a global letter email to all of our employees, basically denouncing what has been done and saying that there's no room for that at the FDIC. And if folks feel that way, there are other places they can find jobs. It's not appropriate. So, thank you. For the record, the president has not called me on anything, so. I would probably pick up the phone and think it's a prank.
Thank you for coming. My question is, as times change and mores and morals of the country change, when I was growing up, marijuana was strictly illegal. And now things are changing, and it puts us in a bad position as far as how we conduct our business and how we conduct our business going forward. So would you have any advice or comments about that?
It's probably one of the toughest questions that I get all the time. That and Cecil, and I just gave you the next question you want to ask. Bow tie in the back. No, I'm kidding. It's a nice bow tie. The truth of the matter is marijuana is illegal at the federal level. The truth of the matter is that marijuana is legal at some state levels, right? So you're dealing with these two facts. As you know, federal law preempts state law. Having said that, we have banks that engage in some form with marijuana dispensaries. And we tell those banks, we're not in the business of judging what they do. and we're not a law enforcement agency. Our job is to make sure that if they decide to comply with the state law and bank marijuana-related businesses, that they comply with the FinCEN guidance and that they have appropriate risk management practices in place to adequately respond to the risk that this type of activity may present for them. So without, blessing it or cursing it, I will just say follow FinCEN guidance. So long as you follow FinCEN guidance and you can show that your risk management practices are in place that allow you to monitor that level of risk, you're going to be okay as far as the FDIC examiners are concerned. Okay. Now, as far as the law enforcement and intelligence agencies, good luck. So it's a terrible, terrible predicament you're in. And I have to tell you, as a former general counsel who strictly abides by the rule of law, I think I would have been in a very hard position had my then CEO come to me and said, hey, should we not? It's not an easy decision. You need to grow your business and you need to attract new customers to the bank, right? Otherwise, you're not going to succeed and you can't compete. But at the same time, you're exposed. Your liability is great on this issue. And I think I think there were Pennsylvania bankers, it could have been one of the other Northeast states, that said, in our state, in order to obtain a dispensary license, marijuana dispensary license, it costs some very specific amount, like $2,184.50. I don't know the exact amount, but it was a very specific amount. And they said every time we see an ACH transaction for that amount, we know exactly what type of a license this business is getting. What do you want us to do? And we told them, follow FinCEN guidance. Follow FinCEN guidance. That is right now the one thing you have as kind of a defense. When the examiners come in, we're following FinCEN guidance, and this is how we're looking at the risk of that business, and this is what we have put in place to monitor that risk. That's my recommendation to you. Just say no to drugs, okay? No, I mean no. I meant on a personal level.
Excuse me if I stutter a little bit. I got to say I'm in shock. This is unlike 95% of all interactions that I've had with people from your organization over the years. So thank you for the different view. I guess that kind of speaks to what, for me though, has been the most difficult part of dealing with the regulatory agencies, is that it feels like so much of the regulatory interaction is personality driven. So you have a particular personality and a view, which seems to be terrific. But if you're not going to be around that long...
See, I should not have said anything.
Yeah, I don't know why you said that out loud.
I'll be here for the next 20 years. Crazy. You're all screwed. No kidding.
Yeah. It can't be much worse, so I'm not... that doesn't scare me. My question, though, is so much of our exam process does feel like it's what's that particular examiner in that given year feel is important, or how did they interpret the data? And for me, the biggest thing, I don't care so much what the regulation is. I just want it to be consistent and predictable and understandable, and we'll go do what we need to do. I don't know that that's the general feeling amongst your people out in the field. And so how do you, do you feel like you're seeing turnover and change? I mean, I understand what you said about testing and then continuing to test if they don't get it. And I also understand about saying, well, if you don't like it, go get another job. But do you feel like there is some change happening, or do you feel like, are you concerned that perhaps they're just waiting you out?
They're welcome to wait me out. I mean, that's probably not good for them, but if they choose to follow that path, that's in their right. The personality issue is a big issue, and we have, I want to say close to 4,000 examiners in consumer and prudential risk management, and I can't meet with every single examiner. But what I have done is, whenever they're in DC for a large training, addressing 200 examiners at a time, and literally spending 2 hours with them, both telling them about how we should be looking at regulating and then also and examining and also asking for questions. Tell me what's happening on the ground, and then making sure that the heads of supervision at the FDIC and their deputies understand how we should be supervising and moving forward. And here's the bottom line. We need to exercise our statutory discretion carefully, because we are an independent government agency. We are not appropriated. My congressional oversight is, you know what, the first question they asked me in the Senate confirmation hearing is, will you commit to come and testify here if you get confirmed? And of course you say yes, otherwise you're dying right there on the spot. You may as well leave the room, right? There's not even a statutory requirement that we testify, right? So we need to be careful and make sure that we stay within our statutory mandate carefully. And what that means for us and our examiners is that we need to abide by the principle of do no harm. Basically, take a look at these regulations and do your job. But you kind of need to take a big picture and do your job just right. And for that, it takes a little bit of maturity as an examiner and seasonality. In terms of how are these examiners looking at things, I'm trying to communicate from Washington how they should be looking at these things. And frankly, we issued guidance on guidance, which is a silly name for a guidance, but it is what it is, telling as much to our examiners that this is how you should be looking at guidance. It is not a rule of law. It does not carry the weight of regulations, okay? It's an example. It is not a requirement. And, I had bankers ask me, well, what do I do if your examiner doesn't follow the guidance, and they cite me. And they put in MRAs that, I didn't follow the guidance. And I'm like, well, laminate guidance on guidance and put it in your office. And then if they're doing that, point to the guidance on guidance and say, how does that fit with this, right? And if you still feel like you're not getting your voice heard and your arguments recognized, I will make you get up, Chad. Chad, get up. There's Chad. Chad is my deputy for external outreach. Face everybody, Chad. Chad is a good friend who works with me on the Senate Banking Committee, then went to work at the Federal Reserve, and I like to embarrass him from time to time, who I hired as my deputy for external outreach. He has literally a box of cards here. He can hand out cards after the meeting. Contact Chad, and Chad will let me know. Now, when I leave, whenever that date may be, I can't guarantee what will happen after. But what I can do for my 5 years at the FDIC is put frameworks in place that are right, based on, not just my personal feelings or beliefs, which is not what I should be doing, but based on what the good kind of standards and practices are, and make sure that they're cemented in place so that it's going to be difficult for chairmen who may have different philosophies about supervision to change them. And a part of that is, frankly, the trust through transparency. We put out the transparency initiative on our website, where we publish a lot of our internal metrics, including the number of days it takes us to get report of findings after an exam to you if you're a 1 and 2 rated institution, or if you're not 1 and 2 rated institution. We're publishing a lot of our internal documents and metrics on that website. So if you haven't been to the Trust Through Transparency on our website, please do. Go there, and more hits we have, more I know that people actually care to get this type of information. I have instructed my folks to publish as many as we can of our internal procedures that are not otherwise published in the examination manuals. So you know exactly how we're looking at you and what tools we're using to look at you. So if you go through those documents, and I know you have limited resources, so don't watch television, read our compliance things, okay? Take a look at that, and then when an examiner comes in, if you disagree with the approach, you can point to those documents, right? So I'm thinking that if I can do more of that stuff and make more transparent our regulatory framework, it's going to be more difficult for somebody to walk that back. In reality, transparency and accountability are important. I grew up in a system that didn't have them, and it wasn't a good system, and I chose this system because it works. And in this system, the government owes that level of transparency to the regulated and to the population in general. So I will do whatever I can, basically, during my long tenure at the FDIC, to put principles and framework in place that will hopefully bind others and change culturally how we look at supervision without really sacrificing the quality of what we do. I do talk. When I'm on my nationwide listening tour, I try to meet with my examiners as well. So not only do I meet with them in DC, but I go to our regional offices. I address, 100, 200 of them at a time. As far as how are we doing, you need to tell me that. They can tell me that we're changing culturally. They can tell me we're doing differently than before. But if I don't hear that from you, I don't have a good gauge. We can think we're doing a great job, but if you don't tell us we're doing a good job, we may have a dichotomy of opinions, and I need to know why. I'm serious. The back of the room is so quiet and so populated.
What's been your
You're in the front row. I mean, really?
What's been your biggest challenge? What is the one thing that has been a challenge to you?
I joke that if you're going to take this job seriously, I need 3 of me. I need 1 to do just this job. I need 1 to stay home and help my parents and the dogs and the daughter, and 1 needs to rest for the 2 of us. It's a very time-consuming job, and I'm just really concerned that one of my big fears is that whenever I leave, I will look back and say, "Oh, you could have done more." So you see me, I'm trying to do this nationwide listening tour, trying to make it to every single state in the country, not because it's easy, but because it's necessary. I'm trying to have, a deputy for outreach do as much as possible so that you can be heard and that we can take your input and the public input into what we're doing and be better for it. I'm trying to, I literally said open up every single regulation, and staff at the FDIC just looked at me, like, do you know how many regulations we have? I'm like, well, all the more reason to open them all up. So there's just a lot of work to be done if you want to take the right approach to this job. That my biggest concern is that it is such a large amount of things to do that if you don't stay focused and if you don't execute and if you don't have boundless energy, you're not going to accomplish what you want to accomplish. So 1 year is almost up since I was appointed, So what I did, we instituted something that you probably have at your institutions that was never done at the FDIC. We have ops reviews. And, first I had to walk the staff through what an ops review looks like. And I said, don't worry, we'll make it much easier than the banks. But nonetheless, we're going to put the division heads together, and each division will present their, bi-monthly ops review and hold ourselves accountable and be open to every other division so we know what we're doing. And so that was new. There's just a lot of things to be done because it's an agency that it's easier to get things done the way we were doing them, and we have been doing them, than to kind of open up everything and think outside of the box. And I tell people all the time, think outside of the box, and that requires just a lot of time. So if I had... I don't think that I was surprised by how much there is to do as much as how quickly I need to move if I'm going to be effective in those 5 years. So that's, I'm like a little Energizer bunny going, saying, what else? Open it up. No, yes, no. So it's a job that just requires a lot of attention and focus, and you can't not be focused for even a day, because then a day goes by that you didn't accomplish anything, and that's something that keeps me awake at night. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for asking a question from the back.
So, I started a new bank in 1998. It was a wonderful pleasure to get to charter a bank. The FDIC was my friend in that process. I was in Tennessee, Knoxville, Tennessee, field office was just wonderful for me. And today, take away the capital issues, because you've got to have a bank, you got to do it in a market where the capital makes sense. I understand that. But I hear stories about the time and the cost to get a bank started. My wife and I started the bank we started in Clinton, Tennessee, out of our home. The examiners came to our home and examined all of the stuff that we were doing. And we did it. We started the bank for $60,000 cost. That was it. Today, I hear stories of it cost at least $1 million to finally get through the process. You're burning through a lot of capital before you ever have a chance to get anything started. Now, I'm involved in the Graduate School of Banking at LSU, and so we need more banks. We need more banks across our country because we're seeing a shrinking number all the time.
But what can you do to help that process get better and not be as costly and streamline it?
Great question. And I looked at this when I was getting confirmed. I was talking to, well, actually I wasn't even talking. People were just throwing me feedback at me about FDIC does this, FDIC does that. And one of the things that I heard is that you file an application for a de novo charter, de novo deposit application at the FDIC when you have a state charter, and then it just dies. Nothing happens, and it takes months, and it's a lot of back and forth, and capital is locked during that time because you need to show you have capital, and you just don't know if you're going to. If you're going to get it, then it's too cumbersome, too complex, the process itself. So we have changed the process at the FDIC. I asked staff and I said, listen, like you, I believe we should have more banks. Consolidation is inevitable. It's how the forces of our economy work, and frankly, the economies of scale, again, work against you, and you need to invest so much in IT, et cetera, and cybersecurity that it's very costly for you. So we're losing banks not just because they're not, well managed, which happened, but because the costs of compliance and regulatory burdens are just very high on every side. So I'm encouraging de novo bank formation and de novo deposit applications. But we on the FDIC side need to be better at how we process these applications, and we need to move more quickly. And so I asked staff to change the process where we're doing preliminary filing. So when you would prepare a draft application, you would present a draft application to our staff. Our staff would go back and forth with you on the draft application in a less formal fashion than before, and at the point in time when your application is substantially complete. And all of this will be done on a confidential filing basis. Once the application is substantially complete, you file, and we have 120 days to get the application approved or denied. And so I want to say it here so you hear me. You don't need $20 million in capital to start a new bank. You need 8% capital at the end of year 3 based on your risk model and your business model and risk profile. Okay, so that can be 10, that can be 8, that can be 30. But people tell me all the time, I don't have 20 million. How am I going in rural Tennessee? How am I going to attract $20 million to open up a new bank? You don't need 20 million. Show us what your business plan looks like, and show us that you will have 8% capital at the end of year 3. And you need to show profitability, right? So those are the kind of a basic, and then there are some minor requirements around it, not so minor, but not as important as these two. And so we have improved the process on our side. We have had only 2 de novo charters between 2010 and 2016. 2 in 6 years. And I don't know the exact number because we have now some applications pending, as well as some folks in talks with us about opening new banks. But at least what I've heard from the banks that have opened up since I joined the FDIC is that the process is running more smoothly. The FDIC staff is more engaged and more in a more consultative basis with the filing entities, and the process is definitely moving more quickly. So if you have different feedback, I would love to hear it, but I'm hoping that just the procedural improvements we made on our end and allowing this to take place on a confidential filing basis, on a draft filing basis, allows you to work a little bit more with our staff without necessarily engaging outside consultants, et cetera. That can be very costly. The question I got from staff is, well, how many times do we go back and forth? I'm like, as many as necessary to get the applications substantially complete. Do we have more time, or do we have no more questions? Cecil. So I joke that before I came to the FDIC and had to deal with this on a regulatory side, I thought Cecil was one of MGM's lions. It just sounds like a name of a lion. And then I realized what a painful accounting methodology that is. Here's the bottom line. So long as the statute requires U.S. banks to follow U.S. GAAP, and U.S. GAAP and the accounting principles are promulgated by FASB, we, the regulatory agencies, have very limited opportunity to change things. So we have our own questions about CECL and how it will be implemented. And to be frank, we don't even know with 100% certainty the outcome and the effect of CECL, because it depends which way you implement it, what the outcome will be. And so from that perspective, we have a lot of questions as well. We have met with FASB board and the chairman, and when I say we, it's the OCC and FRB as well, Comptroller Auditing and Vice Chairman for Supervision, Randy Quarles, on numerous occasions, and we have tried to communicate our concerns that there's a lot of uncertainty, and there's a lot of different ways to do it, and we're just not sure what the final outcome of all of that will be. And FASB seems to be somewhat unmovable in their decision that this is how it is. And so what we realize we can do is basically kind of ameliorate the impact of this. And instead of you hiring consultants, which I know for a lot of your banks, the ship has probably sailed and you have already hired consultants, offering workshops on our end and offering more of training from our perspective. But so far, I had 2 or 3 meetings with FASB. I have not been able to get them to a different place. Oh, you better have a happy question for the last question.
A CECL follow-up?
Well, that's not happy.
It actually could be, depending on your answer. If day one, we're funding all loan losses to the life of the loan, how much can we lower capital?
So
once CECL's been implemented?
it's not a happy question, so don't even go there. We have, I don't want to say we have looked at that because we haven't really considered thus far as to change how we should adjust or change capital requirements. Capital is capital, and the accounting standards are accounting standards, and they're not the same. And so the question for us is, we're already working on community bank leverage ratio, which would put the capital at if we go with the proposal, 9%, if we change it from the proposal anywhere between 8 and 10. The question is how much more and what can be done from our perspective. And so what we'll do, we'll wait for the, we'll wait a little while before we even commence that conversation. And I just don't want to overpromise and underdeliver. I'm not sure that we will have flexibility to do a whole lot on the capital side. So it's not a happy question, I told you, and you still asked it.
I do have a happy question. I think I heard that you were raised in Serbia.
Yes.
Yeah, and did that being a socialist country and I would imagine, a highly regulated country, did that give you, coming to the States, did you bring with you an aversion to regulation?
Not aversion to regulation, aversion to communism, definitely. It's I'll end on a personal note. Everything that you read about me from that American Banker Journal article is correct. I did come here with $500. I was 16 years old when I told my father that I would like to come and try my destiny in the United States. And he said, basically, his question was basically, why do you want to go there and be a second-class citizen when you can stay in a place where you were born? And I looked at him. My dad had me when he was close to 50 years of age. And he lived in communism all of his life. He was 16 years old when World War II started, and he was recruited by the partisans. And then everybody was working for the government. And after the war, he wasn't allowed to leave military because the country was not aligned. It did not belong to the Warsaw Pact or the NATO. And they said, we don't need intellectuals, we need soldiers to guard the borders. You cannot go back home, and you cannot be just a private citizen. And so my dad was very jaded by how much you can do in communism. Nonetheless, he asked me, why do you want to go to the United States and be a second-class citizen in a foreign land? And I told him at that point in time, I said, I would much rather go there and be a second-class citizen than stay here and be a second-class citizen. I said, let me go and let me try my destiny. So at my confirmation hearing, my dad was sitting behind me, 93 years old now. And I turned around after the hearing and I looked at him and I'm like, I'm pretty sure this is a first-class citizen. However you define it. Thank you. And as I took the helm of the FDIC, I'm shaped by my experiences. However, much I say we shouldn't regulate based on our personal beliefs. I do believe there's a role for regulations. I do believe we live in a society that benefits from some level of regulations, but I also think that there's a point at which regulations stifle innovation, economic competition, and I joke around, I didn't come to the United States to be number 2. So I want to make sure this country stays number 1. I want to make sure it stays competitive and that we're always on top. So, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, all y'all.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I really appreciate your comments, and I tell you, it really is a breath of fresh air. Thank you so much.